Welcome back to this difficult teaching series on what the Bible says about immigration. And I only say it's difficult because it is a difficult topic. The Bible is full of information on this, and that's what we're going to have a conversation about. So I say, hi, I'm Pastor Brenda. Please hit that subscribe button, hit that thumbs up like, and be a part of us. So I want to just open up with a positive statement. I've mentioned, I think earlier, that I've used this parachurch ministry called Women of Welcome to help me do a study on this for like 7 months, to get me some sort of order in this, like I said, very complicated, confusing, divisive issue that's got a lot of human faces involved in it. So I found Women of Welcome, and they have been very helpful with their resources, their website, their email, and certain people within the organization who have just taken all of my questions. And their email this week had this. I just want to pass it on to you. The number of refugees in the world, the size of the policy issues surrounding immigration, it can all feel overwhelming. But remember, not all of that is yours to hold. You can't do it all. But you can do something each day. You can pray. You can smile at that new American you see at the store. You can read a Bible study about immigration or share this series. You can bring cookies to a new neighbor. Or you can just share these thoughts with somebody else so they can not dehumanize the other that this divisive issue tends to do. So, we're going to talk about the Old Testament tonight. A lot of the Old Testament. We're going to cover it because it says a lot about this. And the Old Testament created what is known as the Judeo-Christian ethic, the Judeo-Christian belief system, the Judeo-Christian moral code. Anything in that same, it all comes out of the Old Testament. Now, this doesn't mean those who follow a Judeo-Christian ethic are Christian or Jewish. It just means that this ethic has permeated a lot of our world. And all of this ethic comes out of the Old Testament, which you will learn tonight. There is just recently in January 2024, a former new atheist who's also a former radicalized Muslim just came out publicly stating that she is now a Christian. Her name is Ayaan Hirsi Ali, and if you Google that, or you can read some of the articles about her, it's fascinating because this was a well thought out conversion. And I just want to give one quote from one of the articles that I've read is, "But we can't fight off these formidable forces unless we can answer the question, what is it that unites us? The response that God is dead seems insufficient. So too does the attempt to find solace in the rules-based liberal international order. The only credible answer, I believe, lies in our desire to uphold the legacy of the Judeo-Christian tradition." Like, this truth is truth. And the more you study it, the more it leads you back to Jesus. And then Tom Holland, he's a historian, he's one of the top podcasts in the world. He has written a book called Dominion, and he kind of has a summary that he realized in studying history, that he said he realizes the values of Christianity are the reason the Western world moved from celebrating brutal societies where might makes right and the strong dominate the weak to honoring civilized societies where universal human dignity is the ideal. Again, there is this Judeo-Christian ethic, how it has affected the entire world, whether you call on the name of God or not. This is why I shared this in the last video, why we do not kill babies born with Down syndrome. We consider life to have value. We consider all life to have value because it's been God-breathed. We consider the value of the identity. The value is, it all comes back to the Judeo-Christian ethic, which is all birthed out of the Old Testament. And then what you're going to see when we read the scriptures, how Jesus' teaching comes straight out of all this. You're going to find so much of his teaching in this. And now we consider the New Testament, Paul's writings, Peter's writings, John's writings, have the same messaging, all coming out of the Old Testament. And this is where the Judeo-Christian ethic took root, because it took root in the form of Jesus, who challenged us to be like Jesus. And to do that, we follow this ethic. It comes out of the Old Testament, which means we do not dehumanize the other, but we are to love one another as Christ loved us. All right? So, throughout the Old Testament, we see God using migration for his missional purposes, i.e., last week's message on Abraham. He called Abraham out for a mission, and this is so many stories in the Bible. God continually calls people to leave their homes to journey somewhere else for some God-intended purpose. So just an opening question, if you're watching this with your roommates or your family as a devotion or your small group, talk about this. When you hear of people who are migrating in another region of the world or looking to immigrate to our country, do you ever consider that it may be God himself sovereignly moving these groups of people to places where they can flourish? Have that conversation. I'll wait right here. Well, a lot to think about, right? I hope you can't unsee that question and add that wonder like to today's immigration problem. Again, here we go to the Old Testament. The great migration story of the Old Testament, of course, is the Exodus story. This is when the Israelites were called out of Egypt to go to the Promised Land. Now, of course, this all began with the migration of Jacob and his family. We got Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. Jacob and his 12 sons moved because of famine, so they migrate into Egypt. Their clan, Jacob's 12 sons, or their families, and the people that were with them, their servants, So a couple hundred people move into Egypt, and they, migrated, set up a life there in the land of Goshen, and then multiply and then become slaves. There's a power issue here that when they became in numbers, the Egyptians began to enslave them, maybe just out of mere numbers and afraid of losing their power. There's a theme in that throughout this whole reading tonight. So, after their exodus, the big to the Promised Land one, God reminded his people to pay attention to those coming in and out of their communities. He wanted them to ensure the survival of the foreigners in their midst. So here we go with this Old Testament. You will find the word 90 times, over 90 times, the Hebrew word ger, G-E-R, and that means sojourner. So I'm not going to give you 90 verses of Old Testament tonight. I'm going to give you just an overview of 90 some verses. But this is just how heavy it is in the Old Testament. So as I read you these verses, I want you to consider how this shaped our New Testament. I want you to see the power in play, the decisions made based on power, the dehumanization in play, and then notice how there's already immigrants mixing in with the promised people. Because it says in Exodus 12:37 through 38, that night the people of Israel left Ramses and started for Succoth. There were about 600,000 men, plus all the women and children. So this is Jacob's family multiplied, right? 400 years later. A rabble of non-Israelites went with them, along with great flocks and herds of livestock. So immediately, there are migrants who are not Jewish, traveling with the Hebrew people to the Promised Land. Exodus 20:10. You hear the Exodus 20. This is where we get our 10 commandments from. This would be the commandment, keep the Sabbath day holy. But the seventh day is a Sabbath day of rest dedicated to the Lord your God. On that day, no one in your household may do any work. This includes you, your sons and daughters, your male and female servants, your livestock, and any foreigners among you. Immediately, the 10 commandments involve your care and the care of the people around you who are foreigners. Exodus 22:21 through 24. You must not mistreat or oppress foreigners in any way. Remember, you yourselves were once foreigners in the land of Egypt. Aha! You must not exploit a widow or an orphan. If you exploit them in any way and they cry out to me, then I will certainly hear their cry. My anger will blaze against you, and I will kill you with the sword. Then your wives will be widows and your children fatherless. This is the law that we don't tend to like. But again, notice the dehumanization. Notice the powering over that is in play here. Leviticus 23:22. When you harvest the crops of your land, do not harvest the grain along the edges of your fields, and do not pick up what the harvesters drop. Leave it for the poor and the foreigners living among you, for I am the Lord your God. This is a practice we still do today. If you know the story of Ruth, who's in the lineage of Jesus, this is how Ruth was able to provide for her mother-in-law, and this is how Ruth met her husband Boaz, which brought her as a foreigner and a Moabite, so not a white person, a Moabite, not a Jewish person, into Jesus' lineage through this offer of gleaning, which was taught in Leviticus. And there are many, many, many farmers, many, many ministries that come in and will glean the crops at the end of the year and provide this for the poor. It comes right back to here. Deuteronomy 10:17 through 19. For the Lord your God is the God of the gods and Lord of lords. He is the great God, the mighty and awesome God who shows no partiality and cannot be bribed. Right there, big verse about who God is, right? He is the God of gods, Lord of lords. He's a great God, mighty and awesome God. Let's sing a worship song. Who shows no partiality and cannot be bribed. Immediately after that, he ensures that orphans and widows receive justice. There's the God of justice. He shows love to the foreigners living among you and gives them food and clothing. So you too must show love to foreigners, for yourselves were once foreigners in the land of Egypt. There you go again. Another reminder. Deuteronomy 24:14 through 15. Never take advantage of poor and destitute laborers, whether they are fellow Israelites or foreigners living in your towns. You must pay them their wages each day before sunset, because they are poor and are counting on it. If you don't, they might cry out to the Lord against you, and it would be counted against you as sin. You see the powering over? See the dehumanizing? See the injustice? You see the sin? Deuteronomy 24:21 through 22. When you gather the grapes in your vineyard, don't glean the vines after they are picked. Leave the remaining grapes for the foreigners, orphans, and widows. Remember that you were slaves in the land of Egypt. This is why I'm giving you this command. Remember where you came from. Psalm, we're going to skip up now. Psalm 82:3 through 4. Give justice to the poor and the orphan. Uphold the rights of the oppressed and the destitute. Rescue the poor and helpless. Deliver them from the grasp of evil people. Moving into Proverbs, could choose many of them. I'm going to choose one out of Proverbs 31, mostly because this Proverbs 31 with the Proverb 31 woman has, so many interpretations. Right dead set, verses 8 and 9. Let's see this one. Speak up for those who cannot speak for themselves. Ensure justice for those being crushed. Yes, speak up for the poor and helpless and see that they get justice. This is our role. Isaiah 1:17, learn to do good, seek justice, help the oppressed, defend the cause of orphans, fight the rights of widows. Isaiah 58:6 through 7. No, this is the kind of fasting I want. Free those who are wrongly imprisoned, lighten the burden of those who work for you, let the oppressed go free, and remove that chains that bind people. Share your food with the hungry and give shelter to the homeless. Give clothes to those who need them. Do not hide from relatives who need your help. All of them. Jeremiah 22:3. This is what the Lord says. Be fair-minded and just. Do what is right. Help those who have been robbed. Rescue them from their oppressors. Quit your evil deeds. Do not mistreat foreigners, orphans, and widows. Stop murdering the innocent. Ezekiel 47:21 through 23. Divide the land within these boundaries among the tribes of Israel. Distribute the land as an allotment for yourselves and for the foreigners who have joined you and are raising their families among you. They will be like native-born Israelites to you and will receive an allotment among the tribes. These foreigners are to be given land within the territory of the tribe with whom they now live. I, the sovereign Lord, have spoken. We are to give opportunity. There is enough in this land of plenty, and we live in a land of plenty. We are to give opportunity to the foreigners, to this quintet of the vulnerable. We're really to give opportunity. Zechariah 7:9 through 10. This is what the Lord of Heaven's armies says. Judge fairly, show mercy and kindness to one another. Do not oppress widows, orphans, foreigners, and the poor. And do not scheme against each other. I should say, do not dehumanize the other. Malachi 3:5. At that time I will put you on trial. I'm eager to witness against all sorcerers and adulterers and liars. How's that for a trifecta, huh? I will speak against those who cheat employees of their wages, who oppress widows and orphans, or who deprive the foreigners living among you of justice. For these people do not fear me, says the Lord of Heaven's armies. And that took us to Malachi, which is the last book of the Old Testament. Do you see how the entire New Testament reflects all of those verses? Do you see the dignity that so many nonprofits and government programs and Christians and strangers and atheists are giving the dignity to people, and where that thought comes from? And Jesus teaches this over and over again. Peter and Paul and John write about this in their letters to the churches. And the challenge is to live like Jesus, to follow this way of Jesus. And this is how it looks. Do you see it? Here's your next conversation question. Why do you think God continued to remind his people to make provisions for immigrants and sojourners? Why? Have that conversation. I'll wait. I have another conversation question for you. This one's kind of a fun one. As Mary and Joseph were fleeing from Bethlehem to Egypt and then eventually back to Nazareth, what Old Testament laws would they have benefited from as they moved from place to place? Talk about that. And then one last question to talk about. If you read the full Exodus story of the Israelites leaving Egypt, you read how Pharaoh did not want to lose his power. Again, this is one of those power over dynamics. And how he continued to minimize the Israelites, to humanize the Israelites, kill the Israelites, anything to retain his power as a big part of it. So, have you ever heard powerful people in your own country speaking fearfully of immigrants taking over, as Pharaoh worried about the Israelites? Why do you think that we, as well as the Egyptians back long ago, tend to view outsiders with suspicion? Have that conversation. So in the previous video for the series, I mentioned a link, and it's in the notes, to watch this video off YouTube. We only got to the first 6.5 minutes in our group where we read this together on a Friday night. I'm going to put the link again in the notes, and I just ask you to either watch it all for the first time or just continue on from the 6.5 minute mark to the end and then talk about that. So I just finished a really tough read, kind of thick, you see. It's called The Sum of Us, and it's what racism cost everyone and how we can prosper together. And basically this is the history of racism in America, but this is how it has affected our economics. So it's an economic read. It's kind of hard, for me at least, but it was also pretty fascinating because the powering over and keeping in power is good for those economically. And what this book came up, and The Sum of Us is a very important title because it has a zero-sum concept that they keep going back to. And they found out that the average white person views racism as a zero-sum game. That if things get better for black people, it must be at the expense of white people. But the research, this is not what it showed for black and brown people. There was, in their view of things, there was always enough for them to succeed if they just got a chance. There was enough. So if we keep the echo chamber of this zero-sum game, which the media does love to feed us, we white people live in fear that there will not be enough for us. You hearing me on this? But the Old Testament teaches, and this is the way of Jesus, there is enough for all of us. I mean, we have a great God, a larger story God. And when we treat the foreigner, we take care of this quintet of the vulnerable, there is always enough. And we don't have to live in this fear that we're losing out. And it's okay to give up some of our power, by the way, as white people. We're going to be just fine because there is enough for all of us. And this Judeo-Christian ethic, this Old Testament through line that influenced the entire New Testament, it tells us that there is enough. So let's not be living in scarcity, but let's be living in there's enough opportunity for all of us here. I've given you a lot to think about, pray about, wrestle through, use that holy tension, think differently, think biblically, okay, and be changed. In the name of Jesus, amen.